Welcome back to the Content That Grows podcast. I'm excited to be joined today by Ramli John. We're going to be talking about audience first marketing. Ramli is the content director at Appcues and author of the best-selling book Product Led Onboarding. As a product led growth coach, he's worked with companies such as Mixpanel, Microsoft, and Ubisoft, and more to accelerate their growth. And an educator at heart, he's helped train hundreds of the world's fastest growing product led companies to level up their user onboarding experience and turn users into lifelong customers. Um, Welcome to the show, Ramli. Excited to chat today.
Same here. I thank you for the invite. I'm super excited to finally chat with you since I've seen you on LinkedIn so often.
Yes. Yeah. We've made it. We're here. Cool. So let's just jump right in. I'd love for you to just kind of explain a bit more about just generally the concept of audience first marketing, and then
Right.
just also like what is it about having a creator or an influencer
Mm.
that's like an evangelist on your team?
Yeah, I think this is. I gotta give credit where credit's due. I first saw this from Rand Fishkin. I think he was one of the first. He was the first guest on the show, which is super exciting.
Yeah.
So people tune into that one.
Yeah.
Well, Rand's like a big proponent of, he has a big audience as well as a VP of marketing, Amanda Tividat. But like, it's really born out of the idea that search has changed a lot in the last year. I think people are like, oh my goodness, like what it would look like a year ago is like totally different,
Hmm.
especially with what, with ChatGPT and generative AI, as well as I think ads is getting more expensive. And it's gone back to the basics of what direct response marketers used to do way, way, way back then, where they build an audience first. I think building an audience has many advantages. One of them is that you own that audience. You're able to hopefully build a list out of that, as well
Hmm.
as like it's you're not dependent on like ad rates and social media algorithm and Google search algorithm, which we've seen a bunch of updates there. I think people are realizing, especially that it's a little. We've seen this in the direct to consumer companies where they know that the power of storytelling and people who relate to people. So they often have the person like the founder front and center. We've seen this with a bunch of different types of brands out there,
Hmm.
whether it's like a shoe company or an eyeglass company. Like there's a story behind it. And I think I'm seeing, even the last year I've really seen more and more this tactic of building an audience first really move towards in the B2B space, where whether it's a company finding somebody internally to become an evangelist and really building up their name, or even better, it would be the founder, where
Yeah.
they're build the name around it, around whatever problem that the product is building. And that opens up a lot of doors. When you build that audience, you're able to be invited to podcasts and asked to contribute to articles, and
Yep.
be able to be invited to speak at conferences, which we've seen Rand and Amanda do. I think we've seen more and more companies do that, so that they can really like establish not only their company as a thought leader, establish themselves as a leader in that space, knowing like information around that. So I've been
Yep.
seeing a lot more B2B companies do that. And I think as something that I've also been seeing, more B2B companies are actually sponsoring influencers,
Hmm.
which is like super weird. Like there's influencers on in YouTube where like, let's sponsor MKHD or Mr. Beast,
Sure.
which
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
like on the
Yeah.
consumer side. But now like, oh, let's sponsor Kevin Indig's post around SEO, or
Right.
let's sponsor Andrew Kaplan. He talks about user onboarding or growth. And like, it's interesting to see that D2C or B2C tactic go
Hmm.
towards B2B. And I think that is born out of this, let's do something that we know has a trusted voice, and
Yep.
the audience first is what I'm seeing more and more move over.
Yeah, I agree. I think it feels like there's a lot that um, just trying to think back, 8, 10 years ago, audience building was like primarily social.
Mm.
You were basically doing it on Twitter, maybe on LinkedIn. Um, but it does feel that like sort of the resurgence of podcasts, the growth in communities, and also just like Substacks, all those
Yeah,
different
Substacks.
avenues have kind of, I think, given people a variety. Like I think of MKT1, Emily Kramer, like
Oh yeah, Emily
she's not
Kramer.
necessarily, out there like talking and evangelizing, but like she just takes her time and puts together very, very thoughtful newsletter posts once a month. And even that's been, sufficient to get tens of thousands of followers, and then obviously builds audience for what they're doing on the fund side and consulting and all that stuff. So
Yeah.
it really does feel like it shouldn't be a surprise, like all these not new podcasts aren't new, but like these avenues have sort of emerged as like a way to build the following, build the audience, and it makes sense that there's kind of that shift there. Um, for when you talked about like maybe not getting into like sponsoring, but in terms of either hiring an evangelist or finding someone internally, like what do you think, as someone in content, like what are some of the like skills and like things they would do to just sort of be able to like participate and excel in that role?
Yeah, I think first of all, this got, especially in like finding an evangelist for like I'm assuming this is like a B2B like software or even like
Mm-hmm.
D2C. I think there needs to be a person or evangelist company fit. I'm not. I hope that,
Sure.
or
Yeah.
company evangelist offer fit where, like if let's say for AppCues, they're we're offering an onboarding software for a product and product marketers, there's got to be somebody in product or product marketing that would make more sense to build an evangelist around rather than, I don't know, HR or
Yeah.
something that doesn't
Yeah.
make sense, right? There's
Yeah.
got to be that fit first. And it was interesting to, when you start looking, for even for us, like there are some people inside where they often keep them to themselves, but like when there's a few that are, I would say, outspoken, where if you talk to them on a one-on-one call, they're opinionated. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
the second thing that's important, is like they gotta have opinions. They gotta have like, they gotta, let's say, disagree with certain things that is widely accepted. An example is like net promoter score. Like there's somebody
Mm-hmm.
that I've chatted with recently, like, this is the worst thing ever created. Like people are abusing it. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
a great like opinion that
Yeah.
that it might go against the what people think is true. And I think that's like what would make for great building, like audience building, is when there's like something to be said about something, where there's something, whether it's new or counterintuitive or something else. That's, I think that's one. The second thing, where they need to have that opinion, and then just communicating that is like super important, and finding that platform. I guess this would be the third thing that they need to do. Like, where would they share the opinions?
Yeah.
LinkedIn has dramatically improved, especially the B. I'm seeing a lot more quote unquote influencers there,
Mm-hmm.
where
Mm-hmm.
they're talking a lot about things that they're sharing. And what I find works often in that LinkedIn space, and I'm seeing this more, is that they're not just people who are doing well on LinkedIn. They're not just sharing like, here's what I know. They're saying, here's what I know because this is my experience, and that experience is like something that is very personal. Like, I went through X, Y, and Z or Z,
Yeah.
and this is as a result of this. Uh, this is the lessons out of it. So it's almost like there's a story behind the lesson. So I think that is like super important to there's got to be a fit. There's got to be some kind of opinion, and then there's finding that platform is important to make sure you start sharing. And the final thing, I think, is just consistency. I think that's the hardest thing often, even for
Yeah.
me. Like, just gotta post consistently. You see, LinkedIn's changing their algorithm a lot as well, but like I've heard that they reward people who post consistently over like maybe just once a month or something like that.
Yep.
Don't quote me on that. I
Yeah.
that's what I've
Yeah.
heard.
Yeah. It all makes sense. I think just generally it seems like just also just like passion for what
Mm,
the the company's doing, like believing in it, and not just like, okay, I'm here to be the evangelist and clock in, clock out. I think just generally uh, believing in that makes sense. Um, do you like, when do you think companies, like, I could see for a lot of early stage companies close an A round, we got goals to hit, we got to make sure we get to
right.
the B round, cash burn, all this stuff. um, it feels like there's a lot of companies that would go, we can't just like try to like have someone be an evangelist and build an audience and like assume that's going to turn into that. So do you find that it tends to be later stage companies that start to kind of have some of that like margin to be able to build into that, or do you think it's shifting for early stage companies too?
Yeah, I find it's actually quite the opposite. It seems like larger companies are more concerned about like having one person be the face
Mm,
of the company. If it's not the CEO, I think if it could be, I would suggest the best scenario I can see is when the CEO or the founder is the one who is voicing this opinion. And I'm finding a lot of yeah, some early stage companies who are voicing this really well, and they're sharing the opinions on that. We were just talking about our colleague at Arrows,
mm,
Sherelle. Like they're doing a good job of sharing. Like one thing I really love from them that I it's like, oh, that's cool. Stuart, their head of growth,
mm-hmm.
shares on LinkedIn like templates on HubSpot. I get because they help customer onboarding on HubSpot, and it's like steal my workflow. I'm like,
Yep.
I love that. That's so good, and it
Yes.
does well on LinkedIn. I'm like, that's a great way to establish an audience where like you are sharing something that other people can just copy and paste, and people are looking often for that quick hack. Where that's an example of a smaller startup that has like tapped into like, hey, let's build this audience around this as well.
Yeah.
And then like
Quick plug,
mid
real quick. I we just launched an episode with Stuart, and we talked quite a bit
oh,
about
what? It's
steal the
cool.
workflow. So definitely go check
So
out that
cool.
episode too if you want to see more, hear more examples of that and stuff. So great tie-in that was not necessarily intentional. So
Everybody go stop right now, go listen to that
yeah.
episode. But
What
it's
was
a
the
good
other?
example of
Yeah.
it's a good example of a startup. I've seen more mid like scale ups like like a few other companies. One that Elena Verna was with, and until she left there. And seeing that the companies there where they are finding people who are being like the evangelist within the company. The classic example is Drift when they had Dave Gerhardt, and then he left on his own and is doing
Mm,
his own stuff now. And a few other companies, but I do find like larger, especially public companies, it's harder to do this because like there's a lot of regulation. You don't want to say
yeah.
stuff that can get you in trouble but with shareholders, but I think there is definitely an opportunity across different types of I mean, if I can find another example, Gong, obviously there's
Hmm.
another classic example where they've had it's a sales tool, so salespeople are on LinkedIn, so
Hmm.
they got their salespeople to like post up quite a bit on LinkedIn to establish
Yeah.
their
Yep.
authority around like, hey, here's how to do this. They post up memes and other stuff on that. So those are good examples.
Yeah. Definitely good examples. And I think that's a really good point. That my point was bigger companies have margin, smaller
That's
companies need
true.
to get to the next
Yeah.
round. But your point is, especially if it's the CEO, you kind of have a lot of range to make a splash, make a point, and just get yourself known quicker if you are small versus maybe some of the red tape. So yeah, also a great perspective. So at Appcues, you've been there for a while. Are you kind of seen as like internally, like as the evangelist? Do people like call you that? Because obviously you have some personal marketing projects. Like how does that
Yeah.
work?
That is definitely the situation I'm in where like I am the evangelist. I wrote a book around onboarding. I feel like that's why I got this job.
Mm.
Like it's like, oh, he wrote this book. He must know his stuff, which I do know my stuff, and it's been if they need to drop me in to chat with a customer, or like share my book, or we're launching a new like content program where like I'm front and center in that.
Cool.
I am that evangelist at Appcues, along with other folks. Eric Keating, the VP marketing,
Hmm.
is also more well known in the product led growth space, as well as like, I've been pitching that the CEO Jackson Noel, our CEO, should be more like active on LinkedIn so that he can talk about this. He's also the founder, but that I need a little bit more time to
Yeah,
convince him
yeah,
to
yeah.
do that.
No, I understand. Yeah. Um, no, it's cool. I mean, I think that makes sense, and we've certainly seen that. With Derek Flint, our marketing manager, um, and I think he's been in the role for about a year and a half, and was certainly doing some stuff on LinkedIn before that. But he's driving a lot behind our company page, and then also publishing personally, and like there's just certainly been an outsized growth in his personal following than what you would see on the company page, which shouldn't be news to anyone at this point, but just really highlights that when you watch from like two basically the starting point, and see the difference in growth, and knowing that like essentially the same person's behind both of them. So it's not a matter
Mm,
of like, oh, someone's posting low quality content on the company page. Like it really is
right.
a noticeable difference, and just kind of goes a long way. And certainly just having the relationships. And I think one of the interesting things you mentioned early about like um, Rand and some of those examples, and how it gets you invites into places and things like that. I think it's certainly, yeah, it's just a top of mind thing. But I also think the interesting aspect, when you tie it back to content, is that there is sort of that, for most people, they're going to understand like the person is associated with a brand, and then when they come across a video or a blog post in the SERPs, or anything like that, and they can kind of go, oh, I know that company because I've seen Derek stuff or Ramli stuff, and like I get what they're posting. I think they're smart. Now I'm going to go to it. It just does sort of add this like um, I don't know, like kicker in like all of your
Mm,
marketing across everything, that you can just have some of that additional trust and familiarity there.
yeah. And I think the cool thing is like if companies have like a sales team where it happened to us, we're like, oh, I love the content from the guy with the hat. They don't even know my name, but like they know I'm the guy with the hat, and they're like, I watch some of his videos, or like read some of his content,
That's so
and I feel
funny.
like that's a cool thing when like for Derek, where I read some of his posts, and it's helpful and startup. I feel like there's definitely that influence there again, where it does help close the sales a little bit faster, knowing that the content is helpful and is coming from somebody who is an expert or an evangelist within the organization.
Yep. Yeah, just opens the book for folks to see more inside. That makes sense. Um, do you feel that this type of role, like, does it pose any potential like challenges or hurdles for brands in terms of like the audience ownership and some of those things? Like, what do you think that looks like?
Yeah, I would say I think the risk, and we've seen this with companies like I mentioned Dave Gerhardt with Drift, or Elena Verna, and other evangelists, is that the person, it might, we've seen this past year. There's been a lot of moves, whether that's through layoffs or people just moving jobs. I think building an audience and attaching it to a company, the big risk is that they leave and then they carry on that audience, which something that is definitely there. But that's why I think often I'm a big fan of having the founder
Mm,
being that one, because like they have more vested, they're more invested into the organization, because they've hopefully poured their blood, sweat, and
yeah,
tears and some
yeah,
money into it. But I would say anybody also in the executive team. So that's why I'm usually a big fan of, like, somebody who has a little bit more investment in the organization to stick around. But
Yeah,
obviously, like, I think the testing out with a few. I mean, it's not like you're losing all of that audience per se. There is still that attachment to that company now. Like, for example, Dave would always forever be attached to Drift no matter what he does. And I think like Drift has like aura now. Like, there's this
sure.
person that has been around for some time, and even building up this audience, they're still thinking about Drift as well with that. So I think there's definitely like advantages to both, even though it's like things have move on. So I think that's a huge one risk. I wouldn't say necessarily a huge risk, but like it is something that people need to consider
Yeah.
when they are like finding an internal evangelist, per se.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think there's also Nick. I can't remember his last name.
Oh yeah,
Moved
Nick
on
Bennett.
from Alice. Yeah, and
Yeah,
you
I saw
mentioned
that.
Gong. Like Devin Reed moved on from
Right,
Gong.
Devin
Like,
Reed, of course. Yeah,
yeah,
it's a lot of
um,
people.
yeah. And I think the interesting thing is like the nature of what we're talking about is like I I doubt any of these companies have someone leave and then a week later look in their Salesforce or any of their dashboard and go, oh no, all our revenue left because of them. It's like
Yeah,
it's just going to be
right.
like this slow tailing off of like like just kind of like it slowly builds up. I think it probably slowly tapers off too. And like you said, there is kind of that aura effect, but like um yeah, it's just sort of sneaky how much it influences and touches all these things, and you're not necessarily going to see the impact. So
That's
I could
true.
see it kind of be like a risk, but also initially if someone does leave, kind of be like, oh, maybe we're okay, but then not really realizing that it's going to kind of, like I said, taper
That's
off.
true.
So
That's a
yeah,
good point. And I think the other pieces, like, they're hopefully they've created some content that stays with the organization, like blog
sure,
posts
yeah,
or webinar recordings. And when that evangelists like are doing like other stuff, they'll be like, oh, you know, Derek, or what's his name, Dave used to work at Drift, or
sure,
Nick used to work at Alice. And so I think there's a
the
little bit of
bio,
that
yeah,
yeah, that bio, and that, like, that byline, and hey, like, we hire good people
totally,
here.
yeah,
So I think there's like that benefit as well that they can see for sure.
yeah, cool. I like that. Well, yeah, I think obviously you're a great person to talk about this just because you've been kind of living that role for a while. Anything else you kind of want to hit on the topic of audience first marketing before we move into the final four?
Yeah, I would say that we've covered a lot of topics, but the thing that is, that I'm really like working on right now is consistency. I think that's like just carving out time
Mhm.
is super important, and giving space. One thing that I've done, I forgot who I learned this from. I think I heard it from, oh man, I forgot. I think from HubSpot team or something like that, where they carve out days. They call it Create Day,
Oh,
where I have like either Monday or Thursday where like it's blocked off. And I've told my boss about this, Eric. Hey, like these days I need to create content for LinkedIn or things like that, or email for the newsletter. If people need to book me, just send me a message if you need to. But like, you need to carve out like actual like longer stretches of creation day.
hmm,
And I think that's one thing that if people are looking for evangelists, like, either give them some space to write down their opinions somewhere, and then help flesh that out as well. I think those are something that I'm working on right now,
yeah.
trying to figure that out.
No, that's a great point to add, and it's smart. I think when I find when I personally struggle to get stuff done, it's because I am trying to squeeze it in to other stuff, and just the context switching. You don't get into flow state, like
Mm.
takes a lot. And when I have done well, it's because I've been in a period of my life where I'm able to be like, all right, 3 hours on Sunday afternoon, I'm gonna you just sit down and like, really develop a lot of this stuff out. And then that's obviously not like the greatest thing sustainably to be like, well, I use the weekends to do all it, like,
That's true.
but that's
Yeah,
nice that you kind of built a little bit of that pattern to, a day in the week, just kind of carve that out and get through it, get into the rhythm and all that stuff. So that's great thing to add. Shifting into the final four, same questions we ask every guest. Starting with the first one, which is, what is a recent learning or success you'd like to share?
yeah. I think an interesting result, and we're still like figuring this stuff out. Is like we're seeing our organic traffic from YouTube videos like increase over the last few weeks.
Hmm.
I am not sure. This is once again probably an algorithm thing where the Google or something is like creating some kind of changes in the algorithm, and they're pushing video potentially more. But what videos we have is like shorter videos about based on like our top performing blog posts. I've seen a few companies do this well. Shopify is one of them, where like they would take their top blog posts, turn it into a video script, and then like splice it up. Like, what is user onboarding? And then there's a content for that. So like right now, if you went to YouTube and like search user onboarding, our playlist is like number one there, which
Hmm.
I'm super fun, proud about as well. Other companies has done it, like Panadoc and even HubSpot, where they have been playing this playbook the last year, and it seems like it potentially can be in momentarily be defensible against AI content until ChatGPT comes out with AI videos, where like it'll just mimic you and create YouTube videos of like
Yeah.
Nate, and he looks like him, he talks like him, and he writes like
Yeah.
Nate, and I was like, oh
Yeah.
man, now what do we do? It creates everything types of content, but at the
Yeah.
moment, no, I don't see that being AI. AI can create like a video of you explaining a content
Yeah.
or something, or walking through an onboarding experience.
Yeah, I agree. Anything I've seen on that front, the mouth movement and facial expressions, just not not
Right.
anywhere near correct, or
Oh
human
man.
really.
Yeah.
But that's cool. That makes a lot of sense. And just I think just generally we've seen a trend of just a lot more video being integrated into SERPs,
Yeah.
and so it makes sense that
Yeah.
you're kind of picking up that. Um, so for Appcues, what role does content play in the overall marketing strategy?
Yeah, I would say content's like super critical across the funnel. um Appkis was built on the founders like Jonathan and um the CEO as well. Like they're both were creating like content right from the get-go, like thought leadership content. And then we have like courses, free courses, we
Mm,
have like guides, we have calculators. Like yeah, it is like super critical
yeah,
for us.
yeah, cool. Um, how so? Like your director of content, like how does Appcues define success for like you and the content team?
For us, like there- we have two I guess functions, or two ca- branches in the content team. On one side we have like qualified signups, and shout out to KK, who is like our senior content manager, who like is focused on getting qualified signups from organic. For me and myself, I'm focused on building an audience, which we've been talking quite a bit
Hmm.
about.
Hmm.
So building an email list, and they're looking at impressions now, and making sure that we are establishing like our content programs there as well. So I think those are the two things we're focused on: qualified signups, and the other side is building an audience through our email list.
Yeah, cool. That feels really balanced. I like that. All right, and then lastly, what's your least favorite marketing conversation happening in social channels right now, and why?
Right. Well, we've talked about this quite a bit. It's anytime I see like a Google update, I get a heart attack. I mean, like, oh my goodness, like, what did they do this time around? And then, like, I'm not sure. There's been a lot of conversation about like what they're doing, what they're going to do, what will happen next year. And I think some people have some idea, Eli Schwartz, he's like the other product-led SEO. Aleda Solis, there's a few other folks, Kevin Indig, like, but I think there's still things that are changing too quickly where like we don't know. We
Yeah.
don't know what 2024 will look like. I mean, in overall, but even more so where a lot of companies have been so dependent, especially like including AppQues, so dependent on organic
Mhm.
traffic through search, and things have dramatically changed. So I think it's not my favorite part because I'm not sure what's gonna happen. What are they
Yeah.
doing this time around?
Yeah, it does. It is a lot. I think it's like it's interesting because I feel like it's exciting. Like I remember,
Mm,
so like I was originally drawn to search, um, just sort of trying to figure out like what are all the inputs, the mechanics, and like how does this whole thing work. And then very quickly realized because back then it was like uh, caffeine update, freshness, and then Panda. There
right.
was like
Yeah.
a lot, and it just felt like cool. Well, if we keep staying on top of this, like these updates, like 10, especially once I joined Sprout, like our performance would typically go up with each, core update and a lot of
That's
that. And
cool.
but it just kept feeling like the playing field was always being leveled. And then we just went through this long period of like search is search, and everyone's kind of just doing this stuff. And so it is, challenging and concerning in, all the different emotions that go with it. But I think I also throw exciting in there. Like
That's
it,
true.
it's fun that like people, not, even the most experienced people don't really know what to expect and what's going to have to happen. And
Right.
I don't think that it warrants in any way like SEO is dead or any of those,
Oh, of course not. Yeah.
rhetorics, but like it's cool. Like it's just going to be a big shift, and the people who figure it out and pivot
Mm,
will um, see a lot of success
mm,
before everyone else figures it out and becomes commonplace and stuff. So,
that's true.
but I agree. There's some mini heart attacks, and there's been 5 major updates in the last few months. Like it's it's been a flurry for sure. So I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining. This was a great conversation. Really enjoyed talking through audience first marketing, and agree like there's a lot kind of moving that direction, and a lot of new opportunities for companies that are paying attention and taking advantage. So awesome stuff. Thanks so much for joining today.
Thanks so much, Nate. Appreciate it.